Hello, I'm Anthony. Today I'm going to show you how I recorded a MIDI line using the Chapman stick. The Chapman stick is a pretty unique bass instrument. I've got an image of one on screen here. Famously used by a man called Tony Levin, my favourite bass player, and somebody who's been basically blowing my mind for the last 35 years with his bass lines. I first came across him as a teenager, being introduced to the Discipline trilogy from King Crimson in the early 1980s, and his bass work on that is just the very best you can possibly imagine. Also very famously played with Peter Gabriel on albums like So and Us. A truly fabulous musician, and it's such a unique sound that I couldn't replicate it live. Generally speaking, I like to play live instruments live. I play bass and guitar, but I don't own a Chapman stick. So I've programmed one today and I'm going to show you how I did it. I'm going to play you 6 bars of this piece of music that I'm still in the process of writing. It's basically just an unfinished mix at the moment, but I'll play you what we've got and then I'll go through how we got this sound. Okay, so it's the stomach rumbling, soul tearing sound of the Chapman stick. All of that lovely unctuous sub bass is just incredibly difficult, well, impossible to replicate on the Fender Jazz bass that I own. And so I had no choice other than to program it using MIDI. Now, it should be said really that you're going to find this very difficult to do without some decent Chapman stick samples. I'm fortunate enough to own Trillion, which is an expansion to Spectrasonics Omnisphere, and Trillion has a full Chapman stick implementation. These things called multis in Omnisphere allow you to have different articulations, and as you can see, on one track split across 8 MIDI channels, I can have up to 8 different Chapman stick articulations, and this is a huge part in how we're going to go about making that authentic sound. Just to give you a very brief introduction to what those different articulations sound like. The basic stick on channel 1 is that, all the way up to something like the FX thump, which is literally just a thud, or harmonics. So these articulations are radically different sounding, and once you become familiar with at least listening to Chapman stick, I've never played one, but I've been listening and adoring Tony Levin's music for so many years, and then later Trey Gunn is another very great exponent of the Chapman stick. I'm familiar with how they're supposed to sound, and so when I hear these articulations, I think, I know where I'm supposed to do that. All right, let's break it down. I'll show you the whole process. I've got this track called Merged, which is an approximation of how I actually wrote this line. The first thing was it was played live on the keyboard, so I had the piece going in the background with no bass line at all, and I just composed a bass line over the top of it. And what we've got down here on this merged track, this is actually a reverse engineered process. It's not quite exactly what was played, but it's very close. So this has no articulations at all. All you're going to hear now is the standard full range stick, the MIDI channel 1 stick, played completely natively, and I've soloed it so we can just hear the sound itself. It sounds pretty artificial. It's okay, and in the context of the rest of the song, if everything else was running along over the top, you might struggle to hear the difference between that and the full version, but I'll A/B them actually. Let's listen to the fully articulated version instead, which comprises all these 6 tracks. Genuinely authentic. I think that sounds very, very close to what a real Chapman stick sounds like, and it's those articulations that are doing the job. Obviously, Trillion is a tier 1 bass modules. So, you know, I'm using the very best quality samples here. So here's the process. If I zoom out, you'll see in a little bit of context, the entire thing is 28 bars long. Right at the end of this video, I'll play you the entire thing with all of the music on top, but I just want to really dive into the process of writing the MIDI today. So we start with our natural track, which contains all of the MIDI notes with no articulations at all. Then I created myself 8 MIDI tracks and named them the 8 different articulations. So they were empty MIDI tracks at this point. Assigned them to MIDI channels 1 to 8 so that I'm ready to take all of this information. And then I copied the entire bass line 8 times, duplicated it up onto all of these different tracks. So now every track had an identical copy of exactly the same notes. Now, obviously, you don't want to play all of those notes simultaneously. So as you can see, the vast majority of the notes are actually muted. Copy the notes 8 times, put them on all of the tracks, mute everything so that you've got complete silence, and then bring in the notes that you want. So let's start up at Basic Stick, which is the first track. And as you can see, the vast majority of these notes are unmuted. This is the core of the sound. And now we begin the process of listening to all of the different articulations and finding out what they do. Let's have a listen to a couple of them. I'll play Slide Down. Slide Up has got a little bit of a tick and then a slide down. And you hear that little bit of like bass rumble right at the end. I'm going to basically make sure I don't catch that. I don't want that little bit of rumble. Harmonics. So all of these articulations are absolutely essential, but you need to find out where each one of them is going to live. Now, it helps to be devoted to the point of obsession to somebody like Tony Levin. If you really, really listen to every note that he plays, then you start hearing where he puts his harmonics and where he does his slide downs. And most importantly, how subtle he is with these articulations. You cannot overdo this stuff. So if we have a look across some of these articulation tracks, you'll see that the instances of their use are very minimal. Let's have a listen to this slide down. So there are 2 of those in this 6-bar loop that I've got cycled. We're only going to hear that twice. If you don't do that every bar, it's going to tire very quickly. Most of the time, you want nice, clean, simple notes, and the articulations embellish or enhance this core kind of bedrock. In my opinion, that's what makes Tony Levin so great. He is capable of playing the same thing absolutely rock solid for 2 minutes, and every now and again, he just put a tiny little bit of articulation to one of those notes and it just transforms the entire piece. And you can see me evolving how this piece has been written. When that first note was played in originally by me live, it was only a beat long. When I came to turn it into a slide note, I had to make it longer to give that slide an opportunity to evolve. This is using the articulations and finding out how they really work. What else have we got in that first bar? Let's have a quick run down each of the tracks and see if I can find any other notes. We have 1 staccato note halfway through the 3rd beat. So let's have a listen to those 3 together. Slide down. 1 short staccato note followed by the full notes of the standard stick. Now, annoyingly, when I was writing this thing, because I've reverse engineered it, it's not a perfect demonstration. All of these tracks should have all of the notes, and as you can see, I've actually deleted a couple of them off this basic stick track, but that staccato note should still be there, and then I can A-B between them. I've put it back in so that I can demonstrate it properly. So I've put the note back in the standard full range and taken that note out, as opposed to really subtle, isn't it? It's really subtle, but it does matter. They do sound different. The staccato's got a slightly sharper pop to it. Let's move on to bar 24. So I've selected the merge track, even though we're never going to hear this. This is just like a composite view so that you can see the entire thing. A couple of notes at the beginning of the bar, but then we've got these 4 short notes. We need to decide how they're going to be played. Now, I knew they wanted to be staccato in some form, and as you can see on the staccato track, here they are, but they actually ended up being thumps. So if we just cycle around bar 24, let's have a listen to this one. We've also got a stick up and down at the end. We'll get onto that in a moment. Just want to concentrate on these thumps for now. If I take the thumps away and switch them back to staccato, this is the advantage of keeping all of the notes on all of the tracks. You can just basically toggle the mute states and decide which notes you're going to listen to. So now this is the staccato version of the same piece. It's okay. You know, I could have left it there. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think the thumps do sound better. Now this slide, got a bit of a problem with it because the slide down takes a little bit too long. You can see that that entire note is played in the course of a beat and it needs to get out of the way in order for the next note to get played. But naturally played, it takes, well, there's 2 beats and then there's a bit of kind of flubbiness going on at the end. I don't want any of that, but I want the pitch bends to be much faster than it actually is. The uptick is fine, but the downslide is too slow. Now, I played around with the pitch bend. I knew that I wanted to slide down to a C2, and on the originally played track, you can see that I slid down over the course of an entire beat. The problem is that that makes the natural sound of the sample just sound artificial. It sounds fairly horrible. In fact, if we listen to this merged version, you'll hear it's not a slide down itself, but you'll get an idea of what I'm talking about. It sounds like some, you know, sci-fi boom, like the Death Star being deactivated or something. So that's not what we want at all. But on the final version of the track, the compromise that I found that got me where I needed to be was to put a very, very small pitch bend slide right at the end of the note. It's fast enough so that you don't catch its artificial nature. So we've got a little bit of the natural slide down of the sample itself, and then right at the end, I basically just kind of crank it up, and the artificialness goes away. Let's hear this one. There's not enough time for your ear to register that there's a problem here, but without this pitch bend, it doesn't actually work. I'll just get rid of it momentarily. It does stop too abruptly. That little bit pitch bending, it works perfectly well. Speaking of which, it's worth polishing your skills as far as pitch bend editing is concerned. It's a strange one. It actually operates plus or minus 8192. It's a strange number. It's 2 to the power of 14, and it's an artifact of the MIDI protocol. But this number here, this edit point down here, you can see minus 4,779. I'm just going to get a little bit nerd on you for a moment. It's 8,192 divided by 12 multiplied by 7. So you basically need to figure out, I had the transpose on this particular instrument set to 12 semitones. Let's have a look in the original sound on channel 5. So I had a pitch bend down of 12 semitones because originally when I was coding this part, some of my pitch bends did descend an entire octave. Now, in the end, I decided I didn't want them. You can see there are no 12 semitone pitch bends on this part anymore. But there was a moment in time when some of them were going 12 and some of them were going 7. And so I needed to program this particular pitch bend to travel exactly 7 semitones. And the magic number is 4779. Having thrown away the full octave bends, I didn't really need to fix it. It already worked. So this is an example of me using a combination of MIDI and the natural characteristics of the sample. I'm listening to the articulation, hearing which bits I want and what job it has to do. It needs to get up a little tick and then down 7 semitones in the space of a single beat, and it needs to sound completely natural. And this is how I accomplished all of that stuff. So the cumulative effect of that entire bar, 4 thumps plus a slide. Bar 25 doesn't have anything worthy. Basically, it's all just full articulation notes. Bar 26 has a single articulation, but it doesn't matter. There's only one. This is the subtle stuff that I'm talking about that makes it, that really transforms it. We have a single staccato note. You can see it on the track here at the beginning of halfway through 26. Let's have a listen to those two together. There's a wraparound note there. Don't worry about it. The note at the beginning of bar 27 is just imposing a little bit, but we're listening to this staccato note. It's real punch, an extra bit of snap to it. If I take that away, put the original note back in, it sounds much flatter. You wouldn't notice if somebody didn't direct your attention to it, but once again, this is the stuff that's going to make it sound good. Bar 27 has a couple of articulations. This is the second instance of the slide down note at the beginning of the bar. But we've got two harmonics, and these are the only harmonics in this 6-bar example. In fact, if I scroll out for the entire 28-bar piece and select my harmonics, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 instances in the entire 28-bar piece. The more extreme an articulation, the more careful you have to be about its use. Now, not to belabor a point, but once again, the king of harmonics, Tony Levin, pops these at exactly the right moment. It just absolutely melts me every time he does. So I wanted to get some in, but finding the right place is all important. So slide down at the beginning of the bar, a couple of harmonics, that sounds like this. And onto the last bar, a single staccato note, taking the place of what would have been here if I'd not deleted it. I shouldn't have deleted it, but I did. Those little poppy staccato notes are absolutely awesome. So you add all of that stuff together and you're going to get a really natural sounding bass line. You can see lots of artifacts left behind from my editing process. Here are some original pitch bend data as recorded. I've subsequently edited that obviously and overwritten it. Some of the notes have slightly moved as I've chopped them up or elongated them. So the original thing that got replicated 8 times, I only actually used 6 of the tracks. There were no slide ups or gliss ups in this thing at all. Just decided I didn't like those articulations in that piece. Everything else is used. And you can see that they've very slightly evolved. All of these tracks are marginally different from each other, but some of them are very, very similar indeed. The harmonics and the FX thumps, which really live in the same kind of design space, you can see that both of those are pretty much identical, as I was constantly toggling backwards and forwards, choosing what kind of variant I was going to have. Right, that's quite enough talking from me. I'm now going to mute the entire piece and I'll play you the whole 28-bar section. Here we go. Hope you enjoyed that, and if you did, please hit like. I'll see you again. Thanks very much.